A week after the first anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, the Justice Department announced that it will launch a unit to monitor domestic terrorism. This after a flurry of legal activity against rioters who breached the Capitol a year ago. Yesterday, federal prosecutors announced that they've indicted members of the Oath Keepers, militia, on federal charges of sedition for their role in the insurrection on January 6, 2020. 11 members of the group and their leader were indicted for planning and executing the Capitol siege. Big deal. A federal grand jury returned seditious conspiracy charges, stating that these men conspired to breach the Capitol in order to prevent or at least delay the certification of the Electoral College vote. According to the 48-page court document, the leader of the Oath Keepers, Stewart Rhodes III, reached to his followers on November 5th, days before the election would even be called, saying that they were not going to get through the elections without a civil war, that it was too late, and his members should prepare their minds, bodies, and spirits. Joining me now to talk about these indictments and where the entire investigation goes from here is BNC social justice correspondent Candace Kelley. Candace, welcome back to Amplified. There are some things happening now. So let's just start from the general. Give us a legal definition, first of all, of sedition. Obviously, I'm not an attorney, but these indictments appear to be a turning point for the cases against these insurrectionists. More than 700 have been indicted, but this actually seems to get at the heart of the actual plan. So is it me, or is this a game changer, this sedition charge?
This is a major game changer because, as you said, what we've seen has been over 700 people who've gotten charged for mainly trespassing and other related charges going into the Capitol. Here we have seditious conspiracy, and this involves overthrowing the government, a conspiracy to overthrow the government. And we're talking about Stewart Rhodes, as you mentioned in your open. He wasn't even a person who trespassed. He was not inside the building. So what they're saying is that this man made a plan actually before, according to the indictment, during, the day of, and even after, encouraging people to still fight against the government. This charge from the government hasn't been around. I mean, over 10 years ago was the last time that they even used this charge. So it's very, very important. And it's very, very important because a lot of people thought that the government was never going to come up with charges like this. They didn't think that the planners behind it will get in trouble. Well, they were very, very specific in this 48-page indictment. They went over everything from training to the encrypted emails to the night vision goggles that they were planning to use. Listen, there was even a boat that was somewhere near and around in case they had to cross the waters of the Potomac River. So it went really, really deep in terms of their planning. Again, a very, very novel charge. And as you said, a game changer for sure.
You know, what occurred to me is all of the people who refused to sit before the January 6th committee certainly will be compelled to give testimony to a federal court if any of these people implicate bad actors in Congress, right? Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They will have to. They're compelled to do whatever the government says now because the evidence and the indictment, the way that it is lined up is so clear and so specific. Of course, they entered, we're not guilty, non-guilty pleas today in court today in their first hearing. But we know that this is so particular. And for someone like the leader of the Oath Keepers, who is a former attorney, former military person who used all of his tactics, Aisha, he knows better, and he knows that this is coming. So this is all really just playing games, that they're saying they're not guilty and that they don't want to, testify. A lot of them didn't want to testify. He knew this day was coming. He just didn't know that yesterday was the day it was going to happen, that he would be arrested at his home in Texas, where he is now inside of a facility behind bars. Claims he's not a flight risk. But if I were the government, I would do just what they did, keep him behind those bars. But he saw this day coming for sure.
Yeah, Candace, say more about that. I appreciate you bringing up who the head of the Oath Keepers is, and you know, I would like you to just share what you have learned in reading all these indictments and just kind of understanding who's being charged, a little bit about some of the actors, because when we're just sitting here watching all this go down on TV, I think it's really easy to dismiss a lot of these insurrectionists as like, oh, they must be a bunch of, you know, poor, white, agitated, angry, Trump supporting, just kind of backwards militia types who might not be all that educated, and it's just like, you know, hearkening to this kind of ignorant lynch mob marching past. But you just said this guy's a lawyer. So give us a sense, a glimpse into who these people are.
Ivy League law school, he went to Yale. Attorney who knew exactly what was to come. But you know what is most interesting is that a lot of people think about the Proud Boys in that day, but then we have the Oath Keepers. These are people who, about 25% of them are former members of the military or affiliated with the military in some way, which is why they were so organized in forming military type of motions and organizing in order to gain entry onto the floor of Congress. In addition, we know that the Oath Keepers, sometimes the way that they work is they send the lower level people in. As we know, Stewart Rhodes, again, as I said, he did not go into the building, but he sent other people in terms of the hierarchy within the Oath Keepers. He sent the lower people in. And, you know, there have been a couple of court cases that have come up over the past year. And through those court cases, we've heard about the hierarchy of the Oath Keepers. We've heard about the hierarchy of the Proud Boys and how they work, who they send out into the trenches, and who kind of stays behind the scenes in order to get it all done. And Stewart Rhodes is one of those people in terms of the hierarchy who is at the top. He got this all done. You know, I went to try to get on his website today. It says that it's going through some edits and it's under construction because even after the insurrection, he was still encouraging people to overthrow the government. But there aren't enough edits in the world, Aisha, to change what's going to go on with him in his future. They really caught him red-handed, especially with those encrypted messages. And those took time, and those we will hear about during his trial.
I mean, this was just so highly organized. According to prosecutors, this was a plot to oppose election certification by force. Prosecutors know this. The people transported arms, which is a whole other thing. They heavily recruited. They taught paramilitary and combat tactics, like you're just talking about here. And they took 2 months to orchestrate all of this. Does all that planning figure into the consideration of the charges?
Absolutely, because when you look at a conspiracy, you have to have 2 or more people agreeing to carry out something. And even when you have a conspiracy in the court of law, you don't even have to carry it out. The conspiracy can stand alone as its own. But here we know that there was an actor, a part B to this conspiracy. And certainly we know that they planned this. They have the messages that say so. And then we have all the video and what happened. Obviously, we know what happened. And exactly like you said at the beginning, I think that the quote was, "We aren't getting through this without a civil war." What is it that we saw? We basically saw a group of mostly men who wanted a civil war. We saw that in action. So when it comes to what he actually put in writing, and that is Stewart Rhodes and his 10 other co-defendants, I think one of them was a woman, by the way, we know that they put the pedal to the metal beforehand, during, and after, and the evidence is there. That's exactly what a conspiracy is. So I'm not sure where else this is going, but Stewart Rhodes behind bars, along with his co-conspirators and the 700 plus other people who are already been charged or have been, you know, there's been some conviction in some way, and many of them who are behind bars. He's going to join them.
I want to get into, you've been talking a bit about, you know, who some of these folks are. I want to put up a bunch of stats about the insurrectionists in general. So according to the George Washington University Program on Extremism, the average age is 39. They're from almost all of the 50 states. 87% of the cases brought were against men, and Florida, Pennsylvania, and Texas supplied the most people to participate in the riots that day. Another screen here, most of them had social media posts that actually implicated them, so they were proud of what they were about to get down and do. And yet this, as you have said over and over, I think it's just so fascinating that most of them had military experience. and not very many of them have pleaded guilty. So we also, we know that the Oath Keepers were recruiting from current and former military and law enforcement personnel. So while I have you, I really just would love your take about what this says, if anything, about those institutions, law enforcement, military personnel, as a breeding ground for extremism.
And I will also add first responders, which is so strange to say that in this time during the pandemic and the past couple of years when we have counted on our first responders so much. But, I think what that says is that we need to change the way that we recruit people inside of the military. Listen, if these are the type of people that are out here going and thinking that an insurrection is a good thing to do and makes sense constitutionally speaking, then we need new thresholds and new prerequisites in order to be in the military. What are these, as you said, mostly men thinking about the government and the Constitution that they represent? Here's Stewart Rhodes. If you asked him what he thought about what went on, he would say, it's my constitutional right. He is on record as saying if Hitler just had a bunch of subordinates who said, no, Hitler, we don't want to do what you're saying, we're against that, it's our constitutional right to do that, he said that the Holocaust wouldn't have happened. So he's analogizing himself to that, looking at himself as some type of a hero that is overthrowing a government that is doing wrong the same way that Hitler is doing. When we look at it that way, I think that we need to look differently about how we recruit people into the military, of course, into the police systems that we have here, to see who exactly are we dealing with. These are the same men that served people on the streets in the country that went and stampeded and crashed through the windows and walls of Congress. Definitely we need to see some changes. And I also think that this speaks to what's going on with white men in America right now. White men in America are trying to find their place inside of an America that's growing more brown and black. They don't know what to do with themselves. Where do they fit in? So they have these undercurrents, these groups that they have shielded themselves and created prerequisites that only they can pass. Because used to be 30 years ago, the world belonged to them. But now it's just changing and they don't know what to do with themselves. So they have found a place in these types of groups, from the Proud Boys to the Oath Keepers and so on, in order to fit in and belong somewhere. And unfortunately, we're going to see more of that. And the government knows this because they know what is on their terrorist list. And that's why they have followed and took the time to figure out and make sure that this indictment was tight for the Oath Keepers and the leaders.
And I think the bigger picture of this, too, is that now the Department of Justice has created a whole organization within itself to track and deal with, presumably, white domestic terrorism. The question becomes, why is it that when white men enlist in these institutions, they do so thinking that they have some rights and some militia charge as white men who go into the military or who go into law enforcement to be able to stomp out people and run this country and kind of move their own racist ideals in a way that a black man who is signing up for the Army doesn't go into that institution with that same charge of being a member of a militia. So I think that's a whole other kind of piece of this that we should always consider, is that the rules are very different for white men in this country. Their grievances are certainly supported in ways that our institutions have long fostered, and we need to get to the bottom of that. Candace Kelley, I love talking to you all the time, getting your insights. Appreciate you for joining me tonight on Amplified. We're going to keep tracking this, and we'll have you back soon. Thank you.